It's time to make some changes.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tanisha Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/locked-on to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. The Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons were looking for their fourth win in a row Sunday and looking to dominate in all phases. Instead, we got a completely incomplete game, no domination in any way. So let's just get right into it and talk about how the Falcons fared at home and can get back on track on the road. So the Falcons, quote unquote, bend but don't break defense finally kind of broke Sunday. So Jarvis, do you think this was more of a one-off, or are you concerned that slowing down and not stopping opposing offenses just as a starting point might finally be catching up with them?
Hey, it'll be a one-off if they start to make changes as far as who they start giving more snaps as far as from a personnel standpoint. Because I feel at this point, based off what I've seen, I don't think Matthew Judon should be a starter anymore. Because here's the thing, you got a guy like Damone Harris who came in and outperformed him, getting a call up from the practice squad. And I feel like this is the scenario, and the Patriots even kind of played around with this a little bit as well, as far as just having him come in on pass rush situations to see if he can do what he was brought in to do. So I feel like they're going to have to make some adjustments with snap counts and really take a look at who they feel is coming in and being productive without the names on the back, without even looking at the names on the back. Like, who's being productive, that's who's going to play. So I feel like that if they don't make those necessary adjustments, this won't be a one-off.
Hey, Aaron, that's strong words from Jarvis about Judon. So I have to ask you as well. And sometimes it gets to that point where you have to look at it and say, well, maybe this isn't a one-off, because we've kind of seen inklings of this, not just with Matthew Judon, but with the defense overall, but kind of seen inklings of this even throughout the stretch that saw the Falcons go forward to 4-2 in that first third of the season. So where do you kind of stand? Do you feel like what we saw yesterday was a one-off, or do you feel like it was sort of finally a macrocosm of what we've been kind of seeing in microcosm form throughout the season?
Well, Jarvis is starting off strong.
Yeah, he came in hot. I
don't know if I can jump as strongly into that, but I'll do my best. I think there are signs of positives with this defense from their performance. Just looking at the stats and being like, they actually were a good third down defense. It was like the best game they had against third downs this past week. So, like, part of me wants to sit here and say, yeah, this game with the Falcons giving up the explosive plays is a one-off, because we haven't seen this defense perform like that. But at the same time, it was like, yeah, I don't know, given how this defense has performed overall, like this being the defense in the NFL that has given up the least amount of explosive plays is necessarily sustainable in that way. So I think there are ways that you can look at this game as progress over the last couple of weeks in terms of like, okay, certain areas of this defense, not necessarily the pass rush, but like their third down defense seems to be improving a little bit. And so it's like they got to get their act together, definitely, as a whole unit, and just play, I think, a little bit more disciplined. And I just feel like watching some of the plays where it just seemed like guys were just kind of out of position, which has not been the case for most of the season, that this game feels different than the other games. And so part of me wants to say it's a one-off, but it wouldn't shock me at all if like we get a couple more games like this over the course of the remainder of the season.
And for you mentioned discipline, so we'll definitely get into that later, because I want to get you guys insight on some of the things that we saw that were a little bit disconcerting as it relates to discipline. But for you, Tori, and I don't know if you want to do anything drastic, or if you just kind of see that there need to be some incremental steps. But speaking of what Aaron talked about, it was one of those situations where the Falcons hadn't really had a season of issues with giving up explosive plays, but we saw it a little too much on Sunday. So, for you, what was the disconnect there, and kind of where do you think this is going for this defense? Was it a one-off, or were we seeing little signs and kind of tea leaves leading up to this, and this is kind of where it all came to culmination for this defense.
Yeah, I do think that it's kind of been hit or miss over the course of the season, and we've seen moments, but it hasn't to the bend don't break thing that we just keep talking about. Like this was you can only bend so much until a team's gonna break you. And I do think that something that was, I think, the most disappointing was what has happened in the last 2 weeks inside the 2-minute at the end of half. I think both of those situations against the Panthers, and then what we saw yesterday against the Seahawks, where they're scoring touchdowns inside that 2-minute, and the Falcons kind of are, and the offenses feel like they're doing it at ease, and they're really getting these big chunk plays. And last night, that could have been the difference in how the second half would have looked, because you go in, even if you don't score points, even if you hold them to a field goal, you're looking at being down 10-7, and you're looking at having the ball coming out of halftime, and instead you're down 17-7. And you don't really go and perform the way that you want to in the first few minutes of that second half. Like, that to me was the biggest issue and point of concern that I had, that I feel like is a new layer to the concerns that I already had. You already knew kind of the deficiencies in pass rush. You already knew how this secondary was willing to kind of give up those 9 to 15 yard grabs, because they felt like once they shorten the field and get in the red zone, they can take advantage of it. But this 2-minute drill at the end of halves is something that has got to change, and it's got to change quickly. It can't happen again, because we saw yesterday how much that bit them in the butt when their offense couldn't get going. So that to me is the most concerning part.
Yeah, and I think you make a great call, Tori, because that's sort of a different definition, or an expanded definition of bend but don't break. Because when your defense is over here kind of bending, and then it breaks, it kind of breaks your offense on some level, because you look and you say to yourself, like you said, 17-7 going into the half versus 10-7, or even 13-7, and anything that just kind of is closer to a 1 possession versus a 2 possession difference, it matters. And then you look at how Seattle was able to do it in 1 minute and 3 seconds. It's like a 15-yard pass, 16-yard pass, then an 11-yard pass. So they're just kind of shredding you quickly. And granted, you do come back to your point after halftime, if you will, and you score, and that's great. And you take a big chunk of the time off the clock, but then Seattle comes back and scores. And so those are the types of things where, you get way more on the side of break than you do on the side of bend. And eventually that's the kind of thing that kind of comes back to bite you in the butt. And even more so than like biting you in the butt, as far as like that team continuing to shred you, it's kind of demoralizing, if you will, from what I could think. And also, like a Geno Smith, like he gets hit 6 times. Great. It's great that you were able to get a little knock on the QB, but again, you only kind of finished him off once. You only got home once. And I think that is something that's still troubling as well, Aaron, when you are in that situation where you have an opportunity to make an even bigger impact by getting that quarterback on the ground. But it just seems like this defense just can't get home.
Yeah, man, it's we've been talking about this for years at this point in time. So I'm just like, I don't, if I had the solution to the problem, like I'd be making millions somewhere.
That's what I say all the time. I'm like, if I knew how to fix it, if I knew how to fix it, I would be making way more money than I do.
Yeah. So we've been talking about this for years. This team not being able to finish plays, and it's just I guess we're gonna just keep talking about it. So might as well make it the slogan of the show, like they can't finish or whatever. I don't know.
And I
We
think
can't get right here in Atlanta. It just can't get right. Or in New York, can't get right.
And the thing about it is, for me, just watching it, it's like this. It's the most simple things. It's not like there's no signs of them getting home. You talk about them putting hits on Geno Smith. It's just little things. I know I don't hate to sound like a coach in this moment, and be cliche, but it's the little things that are the reasons why these guys aren't getting there. For example, aren't educated, coming off
Yeah, you're not
the
3 years
edge.
old.
Yeah, coming up like it because it happened multiple times. To you, you know,
Yeah,
you see things when you go back and watch the game again. I was like, oh man, I missed that one. And the dude just hopping his little happy self down inside, working his way inside for some strange reason. Then Geno Smith gets outside the pocket, boom, and completes the pass down the field for 5 or 6 yards. That may not mean that much from a yardage standpoint, but when you think about what it could have been, it could have been a -6 or -7 on the sack, and then you got the offense behind the chains. Then the play call totally changes for on third down, and it's third down and long, and you're gonna get another opportunity to be able to rush the passer because they have to hold the ball at least for a second or two because of the amount of yardage they have to get. Because down and distance is king in the NFL. It's king, and it always will reign supreme. When you talk about what a play caller is faced with on each and every down. So, and I think that those are some of the things that from a rushing standpoint, it's just the little bitty things, and you can even see the disgust on Grady Jarrett's his like body language when Geno Smith rolled out because he was there. He had gotten through. He had gotten through, and then next thing you know, boom, Geno rolls out, and he's chasing. And he's just like, man, golly, I'm not gonna get him. So and he completes the pass down the field. So all of those things kind of add up to saying like if you're not going to be that guy to take that inside move and then beat that man and then get the sack, if you're not going to be able to do that, you better not going to do your job. And that's you got to hold contain. You got to keep the quarterback in the pocket because extending plays can get real ugly. And that's why you saw a lot of explosive because he was able to hold on to the ball and those guys were working their way back to Geno to get a completion and get first downs.
Yeah. And this was another one of those games, or one of those games where unfortunately there wasn't anybody who could send help because the defense faltered, the offense wasn't able to send help. Special teams wasn't even able to send help yesterday. But when you look at the offense, you wonder, was the offense a victim of circumstance, or did it maybe falter for some other reasons? We'll discuss it when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by BetterHelp and brought to you by Hillsdale College. So Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us, but what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Well, therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. So if you're thinking of starting therapy to help you to deal with the fears and anxieties that you might be experiencing day to day, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. We're about 2/3 of the way through October. So you got about 2.5 months for the rest of this year. And maybe you have some fear or some anxiety about the rest of the way the year will end. Well, you can finish the rest of this year strong if you seek the help that you need to overcome your fears. And that's with BetterHelp. Again, it's betterhelp.com/locked-on today to get 10% off your first month. BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is also brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, you can actually go back to school. History, econ, the great works of literature. Maybe you studied these things in school, maybe you didn't. Maybe it's time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they've not changed basic fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. So all of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures for any of those courses or subjects I just mentioned. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/locked-on to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/locked-on to register. hillsdale.edu/locked-on. So, Tori, as good as Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier were in that first half of Sunday's game against the Seahawks, gaining nearly 130 yards, unfortunately, they only combined for 22 in the second half. For you, was that more of a product of maybe them having some challenges on the O line with Ryan Newsel getting injured? Granted, he did come back, Matthew Bergeron getting injured, or did you feel like there was something else that kind of the Seahawks did to put the run game in check for the Falcons in the second half?
I really don't think it was either. I think the Falcons had to completely go away from the run because they were down by so much. Like,
That's
you have
fair.
to throw the ball and you don't have time to run the clock out. I mean, you have to, you from a situational point of view, after the sack fumble return for a touchdown, and you're down by two scores. Like,
Yeah.
you can't put the ball on the ground and have 30 seconds of clock bleed off before you get off the next play. Like, that's just not something that you can do. So even though, yeah, the run game was working and it was working well, that was something that at halftime, after the Falcons go down 17-7 and they don't come out and score right off the bat in the very next series to start the second half, and they're not able to get things going offensively after the first probably 5 minutes of the third quarter had bled off. I was kind of sitting there like, there's no way that they're going to be able to run the ball. They don't have time anymore. They're in obvious passing situations. As much as it's working, as much as you would like to stick with the run, you just can't. That's not how the game is going. You've given up too many points and you've not scored. So for that reason, I think that's why you saw Tyler, Bijan, and their usage trickle back as the game went on, because they just couldn't go to them anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's a tough one when, like you said, you start off, you come out and it's like 17-14 and you're thinking, okay, that's pretty manageable. Maybe you can kind of stick with that run game. But then I guess to your point, when you go down 24-14, it makes it, a little bit more difficult. I think kind of the toughest part was as well when you get to Kirk Cousins and him not being able to maybe make that connection, in that first drive or that first possession right after that score. That lead then becomes a 10-point lead for the Seahawks. Then you do kind of get into a situation where you'd like to maybe mix it up, if you will, but you kind of go into, well, I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, a little bit of a panic mode that might have you leaning a little bit more into that pass game than you want to, especially because wasn't exactly working for you throughout the course of the day. But for you, Jarvis, what do you think? I mean, was that primarily, as Tori mentioned, some of the challenges or the issues? And maybe part two of that is kind of, what did you see from that offense that wasn't clicking that allowed them to get into that situation in the first place? Was that more of the injuries that kind of kept creeping up in the O-line, or was something else going on? And the reason I ask that question is because, I don't know, it's just a weird game all the way around.
I think that when you have, I talked about this on the postcast yesterday, right after the game, and as far as the Falcons' offensive line can handle one guy being down.
Yeah.
We saw the product of two guys being down, and they play right next to each other. So, and that's just not a good look in my most humble opinion. When it comes to that continuity that you need to be put in situations where you're going to have to pass, right? Because you got to have that communication, because the Seattle started running the stunts. You start seeing the stunts a little bit more. You start seeing some pressures from different areas, specifically in the middle of that offensive line, and you saw those guys not be able to handle it. And you even saw some issues with Caleb, and because we understand like what this offensive line is. We understand that, hey, they are a line that is predicated on running the football and being able to get some play action and then be able to have some success as far as passing the football. When they're in those situations where they have to pass the football, and that the opposing team has some guys that can get home and really get off the football, that was the perfect storm, so to speak, for this offensive line, because like Tori mentioned, you being down multiple scores, like you start late in the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter, and it just can't be in a situation where you just turn around and hand the football off. You're basically playing against yourself at that point. So yeah, I think the weirdness came from that center guard combo, having to figure each other out in live ball action, and you saw the result of it.
Yeah, and Aaron, to be honest, that might be a situation that the Falcons find themselves in come Sunday, because you don't quite know what's going to happen with Ryan Newsel and a neck injury. I mean, that I don't suspect that that's something that can necessarily be kind of addressed or remedied, if you will, between now and Sunday. So if the Falcons do have to go without Newsel, have to go without Bergeron, have to go without both, what's the biggest drop off you see in them not having them in the lineup, in addition to what Jarvis just said in terms of the continuity, but in terms of, their skill set versus having to, for the Falcons to have to go yet again and kind of plug and play with not one but two positions potentially?
Well, I'd like to believe that the drop off should be minimal given the pieces that the Falcons have added to their offensive line since the season started, bringing back guys like Matt Hennessy and Elijah Wilkinson, who we've seen in this offense start games and produce in this offense. And so we got to see a little bit of Matt Hennessy on Sunday when Newsel was out of the lineup. And I feel like, I thought Matt Hennessy did a solid job in his one season as a starter. And I feel like he should continue to do a solid job if he's forced, to play again at the center position moving forward, or even guard, as we saw him dabble in that role back in 2022. But you saw Elijah Wilkinson start half that 2022 season, like 8 games, and was solid. So I feel like, going back to Tori's point, when this question was first asked, like, my initial reaction, it was the score, it was the situation. But I did wind up looking at some of the stats, and there was a little bit of a drop off just purely by the Falcons' efficiency running the football. Like, prior to Bergeron's injury, the Falcons had a success rate of 78% on the ground game. And those for you that aren't familiar with success rate, it's basically a better way of measuring rushing efficiency than yards per carry, because it treats not every yard as equal, right? Like, you get an 8-yard gain on 3rd and 10 is not as valuable as getting a 2-yard gain on 3rd and 1. But, any success rate over like 45% is good. So 78% is extremely good, a testament to how effective the Falcons run game was. But then after Bergeron's injury, their success rate dropped to 31%. And they kind of had like, I think 7 runs where they only got 10 yards. And so you were not seeing the run game as effective. So I do feel like that drop off at the left guard position probably has the biggest drop off. But I do feel like with Elijah Wilkinson, rather than maybe Kyle Hinton, who stepped in on Sunday, like, I feel like there should be less of a drop off, given that I felt like the general play of Elijah Wilkinson in 2022 was about on par what we've seen from Matthew Bergeron these last 2 years.
Yeah, and you look at this game overall and you wonder to yourself still, why are we having some of the conversations that we're having? And I wonder, is it as simple as going back to basics? Is it about discipline? Just what is it? And they'll need to figure some of these things out before Sunday's big showdown against the Bucs. We'll talk about that when we come back in What's Next. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can continue the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, and hopefully it is a positive hunch that you get in this game against the Falcons and Bucs that's coming up Sunday, and hopefully it's a hunch that the Falcons will be bouncing back and they're going to get a win. Well, you can check out the latest stats. You can view a live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bet. So you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Again, we're only a third of the way through the season, so there's a lot of football left to play and a lot of opportunity for you to get a big return on FanDuel. Again, we're hoping that you'll get a hunch in the middle of this game, whether the Falcons are up big against the Bucs or whether they're in comeback mode. Hopefully it's a positive outcome again come Sunday, the way it was against the Bucs just a week and a half or so ago. You can check out the latest stats during the game. You can view live by play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed by placing your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel.com, because FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel and is programmed to bring you the biggest stories daily without all the noise. Locked On Sports Today also brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Falcons have at times been their own worst enemy this season. They've averaged 6 penalties a game, but tough one on Sunday because it was 9 for 72 yards in that loss. You can go and you can take a look at it as well as seeing, like, we saw some missed tackles, some bad angles. Jarvis talked about it a little bit earlier. It seemed like the offense, particularly Kirk Cousins, couldn't take care of the football. So when you kind of look at it holistically, it feels a little bit frustrating, Aaron, because it's like, why are we still having this kind of conversation a third of the way through the season about this team, a team that I never thought we'd have a conversation about lacking a bit of discipline? So you ask yourself the question, don't know if it's an answer. We're just pontificating right now, but what is it with the discipline that we're not quite seeing in a Raheem Morris team? And are some of the things that we talked about as simple as being able to be fixed by getting back to basics?
Yeah, I think so. I think in a lot of ways. I think some of the penalties that they had were just like young guys messing up, like Damon Harris's roughing the passer and a couple of there's no excuse for false starts. I'll take that back. And I think some of it just maybe the Falcons were feeling themselves coming off a 3-game winning streak and maybe didn't, weren't as focused as they needed to be because they just like, oh yeah, we got this. And so I think this game has a potential to serve as a wake-up call. So hopefully it winds up being a blessing in disguise where it's just like, hey, you guys are 4-2. This is a great place to be for this football team. Obviously, Raheem Morris and his staff don't have any connections to the past, but maybe this team was feeling like, yeah, it's different now and we're good. And it's like, no, you still got a lot of football left to be played, and you got to cross your T's and dot your I's. And I think that is something that this Falcons team could certainly benefit from. And yeah, I think getting back to the basics, preaching the fundamentals, all those various things that come into it, I do think will benefit this team moving forward. So yeah, I just think we'll just see how this team, like, I think this next week is going to be so important for this football team to see how they respond to a game like this. I don't know if this Bucs game is a must-win game in the sense of like, hey, your season's over if you don't win this game, because I still think at 4-4 you're still in a good spot. But there's two different kinds of 4-4 that you can be. Coming off 2 potentially disappointing losses against Seattle and Tampa Bay is very different than coming off a disappointing loss against Seattle and then seeing this team sort of circle the wagons. And even if it doesn't necessarily result in a win next week, that's a different situation. And obviously we would prefer to see this team at 5-3 over either of those options. But I think this upcoming week is really going to kind of tell us a lot about sort of this team's ability to respond to adversity.
Yeah, Tori, I think that is a great point as well. And I think I don't have the quote in front of me, but I know I think Jesse Bates said it like post game in terms of what it looks like for a team to be great. And sometimes the greatness isn't necessarily a W. You hope for a W, but sometimes the greatness is just showing that you have the maturity to see what went wrong, why it went wrong, how you could have been better, and at least to be incrementally better the next game, so that kind of sets you up for what the rest of the season is supposed to look like, and understanding how, in this league on any given Sunday, a team can bounce back regardless of the Seahawks having lost 3. You saw what they were able to come in and do on Sunday, and this being an opportunity early in the season to still fix some of those maybe simple things that have gone wrong, so that it propels you into the better performance holistically for the rest of the season.
I think Free makes a really good point about, like, we'll find out a lot about this team based on how they come out this coming Sunday. And I think it was Kirk Cousins who said in post game where he was like, you hope that this is a moment that galvanizes the team and not sends it the other way. And I think that if you have the right people in the locker room, and if you have if you've built something where there is kind of this like trust within each other, that can be possible. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing to your point too, is like, can this team look itself in the mirror, figure it out, and move forward? Like it was one of those things too, where I believe they were talking after week 1. It's like, don't let the Pittsburgh Steelers beat you twice. Like, don't let the Seattle Seahawks beat you twice, because I almost kind of like, wash this game, like flush it. There's a part of me that's almost like, don't even like give it more than an hour of your time and go back to figure yourself out and look at the way that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played you 2 weeks ago. Look at what they've done in the last 2 weeks since. I almost am subscribing to that, where it's like, have this idea of that you're coming off of the confidence of you're coming off of the 3-game win streak against NFC South opponents, and just kind of like banish the Seahawks game from your mind. I think that's probably easier said than done, and I don't know if that's actually something that they would subscribe to as well, but that's kind of where I'm at. That's where my mind goes. So we'll see what this week holds, but it's going to be to Free's point again, it's going to be a big week to see who this team is and how they can, if they can, galvanize themselves to push forward to a pretty tough game. I mean, we're talking about a Tampa Bay team that they took to the wire and took to overtime 2 weeks ago. This is not going to be an easy game, especially coming off of this loss where you kind of got punched in the mouth a little bit. So who are you and who are you going to be in another week's time?
Mm-hmm. And I can totally see, Tori, to your point, Raheem Morris coming in the locker room after the game is like, hey, that stunk. But guess what? We're going to have to flush this bad boy because we got NFC South, because that's our pathway. That's what we determined at the beginning of the season. This is our pathway to get into the postseason. So now that we've got an NFC loss on our hands, all right, that can eventually come back and bite us. But right now, in this moment, we got to flush that bad boy, and we got to get to this tape. We're gonna watch the film. We're gonna let it sink for a little bit, and we're gonna watch it. We're gonna evaluate it, and we're gonna figure out what we're gonna need to do. But after that, we gotta let this thing go, because I think Kirk is spot on, because I'm sure he's been in that situation before, because games like these, they can linger. So you gotta acknowledge it for who it is, find out who passed gas, and say, hey, yeah, I did it, and then move on. You know what I'm saying? So
don't take me back to what happened in the press box yesterday, Jarvis, for like 30 seconds. We just end this on a positive note. You know?
So, I'm just saying, you can't let it linger. You can't let it linger,
No.
T.
Right now, we're spraying odor eliminator in the house. We're spraying odor eliminator at Flower, and they're going to go to Tampa, and it's going to smell. They're going to come up smelling like roses. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons for your second listen. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're also free and available wherever you download your podcast. And we'll see you, but don't want to smell you next time. Bye.
We almost made it through the show.